Hi everyone, in this video we will be learning about Amazon VPC and networking. I have divided this video into 4 different parts and we will be learning about various VPC components in each of the parts. This demo and the detailed instructions are in my GitHub repo as well, so you can try it yourself as well. In the part 1, we will create a VPC with one public subnet. We will create an internet gateway and attach it to the VPC, so we have an outbound route to the internet. We will create a EC2 instance in the public subnet and SSH into the instance to see that we are able to ping google.com or able to list the S3 buckets. And it's all possible because in a public route table for this subnet, what we will add a route going to 0000 via internet gateway. But that's not always the case, because most of the time we deploy our application in a private subnet. So in this second part of the demo, we will create a private subnet, and in the private subnet's route table, we will not add a route going out to the internet. So there is no way to reach this instance except from within the VPC. So what we will do, we will SSH into our public instance. From there, we will SSH into the private instance, and from then onwards, we'll try to ping google.com, but since there is no route going out, it should not work. Similarly, if you try to list any S3 buckets, it should not work either because there is no route to the internet. So how do we solve that problem? What if this instance needs to download some packages? That's where the net gateway comes into the picture. So in this part of the demo, we will install a net gateway in a public subnet that we created, and we will update the route table for the private subnet to have a route going outside via net gateway. Once that route is set up, we should be able to ping google.com from our private instance, because the route would go to the net gateway, to internet gateway, and the outside world. Similarly, we should be able to list our S3 buckets as well, because there is a route going to the internet. But what if we want to keep the S3 traffic within the Amazon network? So that's the fourth part of our demo, where we will introduce VPC endpoint. In this demo, we will remove the net gateway. So the outbound internet connectivity is no longer there from the private subnet. And we can verify it by doing a ping to Google or try to load the S3 buckets. Once that is done, we will create a VPC endpoint for the S3 bucket and update the private route table, or to have the S3 endpoint going via VPC EID, which is VPC endpoint ID. So we will see that once that is set up, we should be able to still list all the S3 buckets, etc. from our EC2 instance, but we are still not able to go out to the google.com. So this concludes that VPC endpoint keeps the network traffic within the Amazon barebone network instead of going to the outside world. And then we do some cleanup. And if you have not subscribed, please subscribe for more videos like this. Let's start. Here's the part 1. Let's go to the GitHub repo where I have all the notes. So let's go to the part 1. This is where the detailed instructions are. So we'll create a VPC and follow all these steps. Let's go to the AWS console. Here I'm in my AWS console. I will go to VPC. I'm already in the Oregon region. You can try this exercise in any region, but I will stick to the Oregon region as that's the closest one for me. We will not use the VPC wizard. We will go to your VPC and create a VPC manually. Let's name it VPC-1, and the CIDR range is 10.10.0/16. I have specified all the names and the CIDR ranges here in the detailed instructions, so you can pick it from there. We will keep everything as default and create the VPC. Then we will create the internet gateway. let's call it VPC1 IGW and create it. Once it's created, we have to attach it to VPC, and we will select VPC1 that we just created. Let's create a public subnet named VPC1 Public Subnet, and we'll give a CIDR range of 10.10.00.24. So let's do that. Let's go to subnets, create a subnet in the VPC that we just created. Let's call it VPC1 subnet. Let's create an US West 2A and give the CIDR range 24. Next step says we create a route table. So we'll go to route table. Let's create a route table and let's give it a name. Let's just copy from here. We'll create it for this VPC. Create the route table. We will associate our subnet to the route table. Before that, let's add the route as we saw it in the diagram. We will add this route going to the internet gateway. So as we see that this is our VPC CIDR, which is the local target, we will add an internet destination, which is going via internet gateway. So if you go to internet gateway, it will show you the one that we just created and attached to the VPC. Save the changes. And we will attach our subnet to this particular route table. So VPC1 public subnet should be attached to this route table we just created. Okay, so we are done till this part. We have to make sure that the subnet has auto assign public IP setting because we want to SSH into the instance. So let's do that. We want a public IP for the EC2 instance. Edit the subnet settings. And if you scroll down, you will have this particular checkbox. Going to the next step, we should create a key value pair for SSH into the EC2 instance. So let's do that real quick. So for that, we will go to, let's open a new tab, go to the EC2. And if you scroll down, you can create key pairs here. I've already created the key pair VPC demo, but it's very easy to create key pair and which you can download from here. So I will not create it here, but you can create here and download and use it in your use it when you SSH into the machine. Let's go to the next step. Let's create an IAM role which has the S3 permission before we creating the EC2 instance. So I will go to the IAM section. Go to the roles and let's create a new role. Since we will be attaching this role to a EC2 instance, we will create the role for EC2 service. Next, permission. What permission do we want to give? So let's see if there's a managed policy with S3. Yeah, we do have many. So for us, the S3 read-only access is good enough for this test. And let's name it VPC1 EC2 IAM role, let's say -1. And we create the role. Okay, let's create the EC2 instance now. If you go to the instances, we will launch an instance. Amazon Linux 2 AMI is good. And we will use T2 micro. We will launch this in a VPC1, and since we only have one subnet, so it's chosen by default. Let's go to add storage, add tags. Let's add the tag. Let's call it name, and we can call it public EC2. Next is configuring security group. We will create a security group. Let's call it VPC 1 public security group, and we want to be able to SSH into the instance, but I want to keep it somewhat secure, so I will only allow from SSH into this machine from my own IP address. So we will choose that. We don't need any other rules right now, so we'll say review and launch, and I will use an existing key pair that I downloaded earlier, VPC demo, and I acknowledge that I have the key pair. Launch the instance. Now let's see if the instance has a public IP. It does. So let's try to SSH into the instance and see if we are able to. So if you have downloaded the key, you have to make sure that you change the key's permission by using a command like this. If you are on Mac or Linux, VPC demo. So we are giving it 0400 permission. Now let's SSH into the machine using this key. And user EC2-user at this IP address. Yes. And I am in the EC2 machine. If you see that, yeah, so we are in the EC2 machine, and this is the private IP address 10.10.048, and this is the public IP address. Now the fun part, we have to verify whether we are able to ping google.com or not. Very well, we are able to ping google.com. We should also see if we are able to list our buckets. It will not work right now, and I'll let you know why. Because we did not attach the IAM role that we created to the instance. So let's go to the security. Here's the IAM role. So what we'll do in this instance, action, security, and modify the IAM role. So we will use the IAM role that we just created, role 1, and attach it to the instance. Let's try to do the listing command again. And very well, we are able to list the S3 buckets that I have in this particular region. That sums up this particular part of the demo. So we were able to successfully create a VPC with internet gateway and one public subnet. Able to launch an EC2 instance which has a route to the internet traffic via the internet gateway. Let's move on to the second part of the demo. In this part, we will attach a private subnet to the same VPC that we created in part 1. Let's go to our instructions on the GitHub repo, and if you see the part 2 instruction, we have the instructions to attach the public subnet and create an instance, etc. So let's start with this section. So we will create a subnet named VPC1 private subnet. So let's go back to the VPC. Let's go to subnets and we create a subnet. Select VPC1 and let's name the subnet. Availability zone, let's keep it the same availability zone as the public subnet, and then here we will give the CIDR range as 10.10.1.0/24, which is available. Create the subnet. Now let's create a private route table. We'll create a route table and we will name it as VPC1 private route table. Attach it to the same VPC. Route table is created. Now we will use this route table to attach our private subnet. So let's go to subnet association. We will not modify the route because we do not want to give the outbound route to this particular subnet. So we will not modify the route. We will only attach the subnet to this particular route table. So we want to attach the private subnet. Save the association. So this part is done. Now let's launch a EC2 instance. In this EC2 instance, in the security group, we have to make sure that we allow the SSH access from the instance in the public subnet. So we'll use the public subnet's public subnet's security group as an allowed entity. So let's see how we do that. So we are in the EC2 instance. Let's launch an instance, and Amazon Linux 2 is good. T2 Micro is good. And in this case, we will launch in the VPC 1, but we will launch in the private subnet. Leave rest of them as is. Add storage, add tags. Let's add the tag named, let's call it private EC2. Configure the security group, and here I will say private SG. And even if I say SSH from anywhere, but there is no route, so it will not work. So what we have to do is we will say SSH from the security group of that we use on the public subnets instance. So let's see, if I say security group, let's go to the security group and get it from there. So if I am here, if I go to the security groups for the VPC, actually let me just refresh this page so I can filter it based on VPC 1. And my security group name is, or let's say, let's copy the ID. So what we are trying to do, we are allowing traffic from the security group associated with the public instance. Review and launch, and then launch. And again, we'll choose the same key, VPC demo. Launch the instance. Now, since we will need the SSH key on the, or SSH private keys on the public instance, what we will do, we'll copy the VPC demo PEM file on the public instance. So let's see, I'll just do more PEM. Oh, it's not here, sorry. So let's exit out of here, and then let's say more VPC demo, and I'll copy this certificate over to my public instance so I can use it to SSH. Let's see, let's go back into the public instance, create a file called vpc demo.cer, and copy this chmod 0400. Now this, we are still on the public instance, so we should be able to ping google.com and also able to list the buckets, as we are allowed to go to internet via the internet gateway. Now let's go to the private instance. Let's get the private instance IP, and if you notice that there is no public IP on this instance, we only have the private IP address. So let's SSH into it, and we will use this VPC demo file as PEM key ec2-user. Yes, and now I am in my private instance. Let's try to ping google.com from here. So we are not able to reach it, it's going to time out. Same thing with AWS S3 LS. Well, let's first attach the IAM role so that we can be sure that IAM role is not the issue. So security IAM role, security IAM role, and we'll choose the role the role that we just created, and let's try it again. So now it will hang, it will just time out because there is no route going to the internet from the public subnet. No, sorry, there is no route going to the internet from the private subnet. Okay, let's see. So that concludes this part 2, where we successfully created a private subnet. We are able to SSH into the EC2 instance from the public subnet's EC2 instance, and we also proved that there is no internet connectivity on the private instance. Let's move on to part 3. So in part 3, we will be creating a NAT gateway in the public subnet. So, and use this NAT gateway to give a route to the private subnet to go to the internet. So let's see how it works. We will go back to our instructions, and if you go to section 3 of the instructions 03 VPC, here we have already created public and the private subnets. We have to create a NAT gateway in the public subnet and attach it to the route table of the private subnet's route. So let's do that. We'll go back to our AWS management console. Let's go to VPC section. If you scroll down, there is a NAT gateway right here. Create the NAT gateway. Let's name it VPC 1 NAT gateway. And we will use the VPC 1 public subnet. And connectivity type is public. Elastic IP, since we don't have an elastic IP, we will allocate an elastic IP. Tags are okay. So create the NAT gateway. So the NAT gateway is being created. It would take up to a couple of minutes for NAT gateway to be available. So I will pause till that time. So it took about a couple of minutes, but my NAT gateway is available now. So we will go to the route table, go to the private route table and create a path or a route to go to the internet using the NAT gateway. But before that, let's just verify again that our connectivity from the private instance is not working yet. That's not working. If I just try to list the buckets, that's not working either. So let's try to do that. Let's edit the route, add a route to the internet using the NAT gateway, and it will load up the device that we just created. So route is set. Let's try to ping, and it's working. Similarly, if I try to list the buckets again, that's working as well, because my private instance is actually going to a NAT gateway which has a route to the internet via internet gateway, because this is in the public subnet, and we have modified the route of the private route table to add anything going to the internet should flow via the NAT gateway. So that concludes this demo, but we have to do some cleanup, because NAT gateway and the elastic IP address that it creates cost money. So we will just delete the NAT gateway and release the elastic IP. So let's do that. If you leave it running, it would cost real money. So please try to delete the NAT gateway and the elastic IP address. So let's go to the NAT gateway and we will delete the NAT gateway. So this will take some time to delete. I will pause till that time. So it took about a minute or so, but now my NAT gateway is deleted. Let's try to go to elastic IP address and release it. So I have the elastic IP address. Go to actions and see if we can release the elastic IP address. So we release the elastic IP address so that we don't get billed for it. Let's go back to the route table and see if we have any. Let's see what happens with association, since we did not delete the route here. So you see that route that was going to the outside via the NAT gateway, it says black hole, which is kind of funny, but it's going in the black hole. That means it's not going anywhere. So I will remove this route and save the changes. Let's go back to our private instance and see if we are able to ping Google now. We are not able to ping Google. Similarly, AWS has 3LS. Let's try to pass a region. US West 2. And we are not able to go to the S3 bucket as well. That concludes our part 3, where we were able to create a NAT gateway and demonstrate that when we attach NAT gateway to the private subnet's route table, we are able to make outbound internet calls from the private instance. Let's move on to demo 4. In this part 4, we will be creating a VPC endpoint to go to S3. We have removed the NAT gateway that we created in part 3, so there is no outbound route to google.com or to S3 buckets. But with the VPC endpoint, we will see how the traffic stays within the Amazon's network to go to other Amazon services, AWS services. But there will still be no outbound route to go to the internet. So let's do that. If I go to section 4 of this document, which is 04 VPC endpoint, all the instructions are here. So let's go to, we have already verified in the previous section that after deleting the NAT gateway, these commands are not working. So let's go back to the AWS Management Console and start creating our VPC endpoint for S3. So I'm in the VPC section and I will go to the endpoints. I'll create an endpoint. Let's name it VPC1 S3 endpoint, AWS service, and the service is S3. And we will choose S3. We'll choose the gateway. And in which VPC we want to create this? Obviously, we will want to create it in VPC1. Now here it asks, you want to attach this VPC endpoint to a particular route table. Yes, we want to attach it to the private route table. So we will attach that. Leave rest of them as is and create the endpoint. Now this endpoint creation may take a few minutes, so we will pause the video and come back. So it only took about a few seconds, but my VPC endpoint status is available. So let's check the route table whether it got updated. So if I go to route table, select the VPC1 private route table and check the route. And I have a route going out to the S3 service via the VPC endpoint that we just created, which sounds very promising. So let's go back to our EC2 instance and try to list the S3 bucket. And I'm able to list the S3 buckets, even though I will not be able to ping google.com because there is no outbound route to go to the internet. So that concludes the demo 4, where we were successfully demonstrate that we can create a VPC endpoint to go to any S3 service from a private instance without going to the internet. All the traffic stays within the Amazon's backbone network. But since this instance doesn't have a NAT gateway associated with this route table, hence, so there is no outbound internet route for this particular traffic going to the internet. So almost all of the AWS services can be configured using the VPC endpoint, and we just demonstrated with S3, but DynamoDB, Kinesis, or any other services that you can think of, they are all, most of them are available to be used from within the VPC using VPC endpoint. So that demonstrate the VPC endpoint. Let's do some cleanup. To save cost, let's start deleting the stuff that we created. The very first thing, let's go back to the VPC endpoint and delete the endpoint. So as soon as we delete the endpoint, let's try to go back to the instance and see if I'm able to list my S3 buckets. And of course, we are not able to get the list again. Okay, let's start cleaning up other things. We will, so that we don't get charged unnecessarily, we will go to EC2 service and delete the 2 instances that we created. Instant state and terminate both the instances. Okay, let's go to the VPC We don't have to delete the IAM role as they don't cost money, but if you want to clean up the IAM role, you should be able to go ahead and clean up. We will go to the VPC, go to the route tables and delete the 2 route tables that we created. You will not be able to delete it unless you remove the subnet association. So let's try to delete it and see what happens. It cannot, because it has a subnet association. So what we have to do first before deleting, we go to a subnet association, edit it and remove the association from this route table. So it goes to the default route table that got created when we created the VPC. Similarly for this one, we'll do the same thing. Go to the subnet and remove the association. Now we should be able to delete the route tables. Once they are deleted, we should be able to delete our VPC as well. So if I go and try to delete the VPC, it will give me that it will delete the VPC, both the security groups that we created in the VPC, the internet gateway, the private subnet and the public subnet. Yes, we want to delete them all, so we'll just say delete and delete. So we have done our cleanup. So please make sure you delete your EC2 instances, make sure you delete your net gateways and release the elastic IP address, because those are some of the things that will cost money. So we have done our cleanup, and that concludes this video. Please like, share and subscribe for more AWS videos like this. I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.